Hi.
Oh,
This is
lights.
familiar.
Wow.
This is familiar.
This is weird.
Whoa, what happened to my eyebrow while we were gone? Oh my god, I gotta smooth that out. Got a wild one. All right, we good.
FHP is
Yeesh.
back.
That's not a great start though.
That's not. No, I
I
mean
had
you
a
get
wispy one. You can't even see it, but it wasn't good.
I can't wait to watch this back and see your eyebrow. What would you do to it?
I don't know.
I don't
My eyebrows, like, I think as I've gotten older, every year now I get one extra eyebrow that just like goes totally rogue, grows very long, and goes like the wrong direction.
I
Um,
I don't want to get
and
old
it's on
now.
full display. By the way, if you didn't know, I'm clearly this direction is where I can see myself. So if I'm looking over here, I'm being self-conscious,
Yeah, I do that
and
over
everybody should just be
here.
aware of that.
I also sometimes look at my
But
screen, like I'm looking at the stats and stuff, and then I look back at the camera, or sometimes I'm looking at the stats and forget that the camera exists. But at least this year I moved the camera off screen, so it might be a little bit more obvious. Before I feel like I was looking at my screen down and then had to like look up and it was weird. Changed a few things out.
yeah,
Oh, I moved. I'm in a new spot now. I'm in New York again. I'm not in California anymore, and I don't have a buzzed head. That's a good thing. I think a lot of people were sad
I
when I
am I
buzzed my head.
am back from New Hampshire.
Yeah,
I think the last time we did anything, I was in New
you
Hampshire.
were. I had a buzzed head.
Back
I was in
in back at the
California.
beginning of all the
Yeah.
horribleness and the
Yeah.
end of hockey as we knew it for the time
Oh my
being.
god, that was awful.
Um,
Everything
yeah,
just collapsed.
I simmed out the rest of our fantasy leagues. Nobody cared. I didn't care. I don't think I actually wound up using the results. But the painstaking amount of time, I think after that, it was just like, all right, well, what can you do at this
I know.
point?
Well, should we
But look at us. Here we are again. The season's
new
gonna
season?
start probably on the 13th, maybe. I don't
That's the
know.
plan
We don't
around
know what the
there.
divisions are, but they exist probably.
Something.
Players want to play the game, maybe. There's a lot of questions still,
There's a
but
lot of, but there's
you know,
more. At least there's more certainty than there was before, and even just a few weeks
yeah.
ago.
But I think we got a lot of questions. We said we were going to come back in the middle of November, and we thought at the middle
We
of
didn't.
November we'd know what the date was because
Yeah.
we heard it was January 1st, and then it wasn't, and then the NHL and the Players Association weren't talking, and we wanted to make sure that we knew kind of what was happening
Yeah.
before we started recording episodes and taking a real stab at projecting things
And we also said
pretending like we know what we're talking about.
yeah,
But
we also said we might do playoff episodes, and we didn't. And there's a few reasons for that. One, because honestly, we don't really know what the hell we're talking about in the playoffs, and it's harder to predict. It's just not. And on top of that, we were
and
really
nobody does playoff.
busy. We did. Yeah,
wins,
we never.
really.
Well, playoffs for real playoffs. Like I meant the
Real playoffs,
the
right.
restart. We usually don't do that.
Mhm.
We like to think of this as like your favorite TV show, where there's new seasons and you gotta wait a little bit till it drops. But when it does drop,
Or your
it's
least
worth
favorite
it.
TV show,
Or your
that
least
you
favorite
watch
TV show.
begrudgingly because
Yes.
people keep telling you it gets better and it never does.
Exactly. You just kind of wait and wait. And you're like, maybe this is the year they'll deliver, and then they don't. So maybe we're that
No.
show. Maybe we're that show. But
Sorry.
outside of
Sorry about
being
that.
your least favorite TV show or podcast, I guess, we also created a whole new fantasy app called Underdog
We did.
Fantasy. So that's what we've been working on for the past months. That's been so much work. There's going to be hockey stuff on there, so definitely check it out if you love us and want to
Yep.
support. Underdog Fantasy on your app store, or you can go to underdogfantasy.com. So that's new, and it's been really exciting. But we have a
And
show
also
to
Underdog
do.
Fantasy on Twitter,
Yeah,
unsurprisingly.
that too. But we do have a show to do, actually. Believe it or
We
not.
do have a show.
Believe it or not, there's
About
a show
hockey,
to do
I think.
about fantasy hockey. So
hmm
let's start off first by walking you through what this preseason is going to look like for us, because it's pretty condensed. If the season starts January 13th and we're starting talking about hockey now, there's a lot of things we got to cover in these next few weeks. So what's the plan? What is our plan? What are we going to do for you? So first off, if you want to be in a listener league with us, you're going to have to join Patreon by some date. We haven't set what date it is, but you do want to do that sooner rather than later. So sometime here in the next like 2-3 weeks, you're going to have to join Patreon. So you can find that either down in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, down in the description. If you're listening to us, you can search Fantasy Hockey Podcast Patreon, join there. Or if
Or
you just want to
patreon.com/fantasy hockey podcast.
that too. That's also an easy way to
There you
say it. Yeah, thank you. You'd think that you're the person who does marketing sometimes, but no, that's me, and apparently not great at it. But you can do that for us, or if you just want to support, that's another way to support us through that. All our stuff is going to be free all season, so don't think that our tools or our episodes. We're not going to put anything behind a paywall. We don't do that here. You get everything we make is for everyone. You get a little bit of early access to tools. So as we're building them out and there's some beta stuff, you'll get access to that in the Patreon. But once it's fully fleshed out, everything we put out for free. We don't want to put anything behind paywalls. We do this for fun. We know you guys do fantasy hockey for fun. Some of you do it for money, and hopefully we help you out to win money, or we help you lose money. Probably we help you lose money. Probably. Probably. But if you do use this for money, great, cool. But anyways, so Patreon, that's one way. You can follow us on Twitter as well. We'll be putting out everything that we do there. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. If you're listening to this, we do have a YouTube channel where you can see our very ugly faces. If you don't like our ugly faces and you're watching us on YouTube, you can listen to our ugly voices while we fill your ear holes on the podcast side. Either way, we're everywhere.
You can also just scroll down and read the comments that are
yeah
attacking our projections most likely.
Yeah, you can.
It's always a
good
time.
Well.
Always
it's
a good time.
Fun. It's always fun. So what are we going to do for you in these next few weeks? So we're going to try to condense. Normally, we do all our preseason stuff over the course of a month. But the thing is that the holidays are coming up, and you're going to have to draft real soon. People are going to be drafting. I think one of my leagues are drafting December 27th, and that's right around the corner. And so we're going to try to get everything out to you here pretty much in the next 2 weeks. Like you're talking about, we're going to preview every single division once we know about them. So we're going to walk you through every single team. Break it down by division. So we'll do 4 episodes, a division each episode, and walk you through every single team and the fantasy relevant players on them and what you can expect for them to do. We're also going to give you our sleepers for the year, our bust candidates, which always is contentious. We always get blown up for our bust picks. So definitely tune in for that one. We're going to give you league settings and tips. That's going to come on Monday, actually. So if you're watching this whenever, our league settings kind of suggestions, especially for this season, which will be really weird, is going to be coming out on Monday. We'll be doing some mailbags. We'll be doing some mock drafts. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be coming in these next 2 weeks. You're going to want to be tuned in. So definitely be sure to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or subscribe to us on the podcast. And we're sorry for shilling this out. We won't do this every episode, but we're back, and it's the first time in a long time. And a lot of you guys might be finding us for the first time because you're excited for fantasy hockey to be back and you want to engage with us in some way. So now let's get to what we're going to talk about this episode. We're going to give you our essentially first impression, our unboxing episode, if you will, on this COVID season. So we'll walk through what does a shortened season look like for fantasy, and how does that affect, say, players that are normally injury prone. We'll also walk through kind of the divisions at a very high level. What does in-division play do? Because there's going to be a lot of things. What does it do to stacking? What does it do to goalie tandems? What does it do? All of that stuff. What happens? So with that being said, very long monologue. Thank you for bearing through that with me. I appreciate it. We love you for it. Let's get into our first actual main segment of the season. So, this shortened season, what are you doing? How are you approaching this shortened season? And let's start first, I think, with injury-prone players, because we had a little bit of a discussion on the side that was kind of interesting with what you think you do with an injury-prone player, such as, say, Malkin.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways to look at this, and I don't know which one is going to be the one that pans out to be true, but I think the two kind of competing schools of thought I have in my head about this are, one, there's a shortened season, so there's less chance of an injury, right? So player that typically misses 10 games, hopefully you get to miss most of those. If they're only playing 56 games or whatever is projected to be on the docket, then maybe they don't miss 10 games. Maybe their injury would have been later in the season. But on the other hand, they're going to be playing more often, most likely. So the other side of that is there could be an increased frequency of injuries and possibly more resting for certain players. I really, the more I've thought about it, the less I actually know how to approach injured players, and the more I'm probably just going to do what I always do and more or less ignore injury risk to an extent. So I've never been super afraid of drafting the Malkins of the world. Yeah, he might miss some games. If I get really unlucky, he'll miss the whole playoffs or whatever. But you have to be really unlucky for him to miss the whole playoffs, fantasy playoffs, that is. So if he misses some time during the season, if you build a strong enough team, that really doesn't matter that much, and you'll be able to get him back in time for the playoffs where it really actually matters. In roto leagues, injuries are a little bit more of an issue, but I'm basically going to do what I always do and more or less ignore the quote unquote Band-Aid Boyd type players and just figure that, if they get their injuries, they'll come and go, and hopefully they'll be around for the playoffs for me.
Yeah, I think that the other thing that's kind of interesting to think about is the fact that if they play more often, there is a chance that they're resting them a little bit sooner. You know what I mean? There is a case for that as well. Or they just rest games almost in general. So there is something there as well, I think.
I kind of doubt they will, just judging by the way that, competitive nature of everything.
Yeah.
They're going to want to be able to get their strongest players out of as many games as they can, but we'll see.
Yeah, that is a fair point. I mean, I think I'm not going to necessarily avoid them. I'm not as afraid of them, just like you. I think like a Malkin or a Letang or something, I'm far less worried, I think, than I would be normally in a season. Normally,
Yeah.
a season, like you said, right? You're missing 10 games or whatever. That's a long time. I think in this stretch,
There's less time to get a season-ending injury for sure.
there's
So
less time to
that.
get an injury in, but I think at the same time, there is that double edged sword, right? Of if you do get an injury, you're missing a lot more time than usual. So
Yeah, percentage-wise, yeah.
percentage wise, you're missing a pretty big chunk, but I just don't think that's necessarily the case. Now, then comes how about drafting? How is the shortened season going to affect your strategy, say stacks, for example? I know you already are against stacks in general, but does anything change with the shortened season for you?
So, I mean, I can. There's videos on Fantasy Hockey and actually on the podcast as well about my take on stacks, and I'm still anti-stack, but I think what we're going to see with these new divisions, and we, as of recording this on whatever day it is, the 11th, December 11th, we don't really know what they are. We have a pretty good idea. I mean, the Canada division is probably going to stick around, I would imagine. But some of the other divisions, we don't really know who the final pieces of them are. But it sure seems like that Southeastern division with involving Tampa and Florida and a fairly weak group of teams is going to kind of boost up the offensive players in that division. The idea of this season, from what we've been hearing so far, is that at least until playoffs, it must be after playoffs this changes, but players or teams will only play other teams within their division. So we're not going to see any, San Jose versus the Rangers type games, right? They're just going to be playing kind of in like, I guess not bubbles, but like contained groups,
Yeah.
contained divisions. And so the weaker divisions are going to be the ones where you can see a boost certain players, and that may lead to more stacks because not every GM is going to be thinking about the divisions in that way. So you may, have in your internal or your own projections that all Tampa players are stronger. So maybe you'll think more of Braden Point or Andre Palat, one of these guys that may be a little bit lower down the ranks and gets a boost from their new division. And you could wind up with a stack that way. Although I'd still, if there's an equivalent player, go for the equivalent player on a different team, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's a good segue actually into kind of a little bit of a discussion of drafting strategy and what we think might happen to drafting this year, both because of the shortened season, but I think also because of this new division structure. And the other thing to consider with this division structure, right? This was going to be a whole segment that we talk about, but I think it's worth just blending it in here. One of the things with the division is that you got to remember they're going to be playing the same teams. It's the same as the playoffs, right? Where you're going to get to know teams really, really well. And those teams are going to get to know other players really well. They're going to get to know the goalies really well. It's going to be a very interesting. I don't know if this has ever happened in the NHL before. I don't think it has. One thing that I really want to do actually for drafting that I want to do a little bit of research on is I'm going to read up a little bit on baseball strategy, actually. Because I think there's some interesting things there that they might employ that perhaps we could employ in hockey, just because of the nature is pretty similar in the way that they're going to be playing games. It's going to be sort of baseball-ish from what we've heard so far, at least. And so to me, I actually made the case to Brandon that there's going to be I think there's a chance that from a drafting perspective, the top of the draft matters way more than usual. So your top picks matter a lot more than your bottom picks. Whereas in the past years, I think we've said like, yeah, your top picks matter, but it's pretty hard to mess those up. And then your bottom picks, your middle picks matter quite a bit because they'll give you that depth and you can find guys that are difficult to replace. The Evander Kanes, last year it was the Dougie Hamiltons who died, but yeah, that's beside the point.
Especially on Cats leagues.
Especially in Cats leagues.
Yeah.
But I think that this year there's going to be a little bit of a different thing. I think that especially those last round picks, I think this year you're going to have to be really willing to just give them up very early because I think so much of it is going to come down to matchups. Say, for example, that you get, I don't know what's a good example here because I don't remember the divisions, but say Buffalo is playing Boston 3 times in a week, right? Do you really want those lower-ish Boston guys or Buffalo guys? Sorry, no. You're going to want either Boston guys that are playing Buffalo a lot or other matchups. I think so much of your in week to week pickups is going to be so matchup driven. I mean, it was in the past,
Yeah.
right? Like it was already matchup driven in the past because you're trying to maximize starts and everything. But I think this year, if there's a chance where like Buffalo is playing Boston 3 times a week, I really don't care about Buffalo players for that whole week
Yeah.
almost, right? And so I think we're going to see a situation where your adds and drops are going to matter a lot. You waking up in the morning on Monday morning is going to matter a lot to get to players first. And at the same time, like I said, I think those picks past, say, rounds 8 or so, a lot of those guys could become waiver wire fodder just because maybe they have a 3-week stretch where they're playing top teams where it's just not going to matter. And so it's going to be a very interesting, I think, draft. And I think a lot more will happen once we know the schedules and how they're going to actually be playing these games. Because I have heard this baseball style where they play 3 games at a team's arena, more of like a series type thing. Then they move somewhere else to reduce travel. If that ends up happening, man, some teams are really going to get screwed. And forget about even like, sorry, I'll let you go in a second. But the last thing I'll say on this is forget about like bad team versus good team. There's also the case for like defensive team versus defensive team. And it's just a stalemate the entire series. Like think about the Dallas series, right? In the playoffs where it felt like everything was, or I think it was the Vegas Dallas series where it was just 1-0 or 1-1 or 2-1 the entire
the opposite
series.
of the Dallas Calgary series, or Dallas Colorado series,
yes,
rather.
the opposite of that one.
Crazy.
So you're going to want to pick your matchups with which ones are going to have goals and which ones are going to be easy, but you might have those matchups over the course of the whole week, not just like per game,
So yeah, right. So one thing that it's sticking out to me with the new schedule is I think one of the things that we here try to emphasize quite a bit, and I feel like isn't talked about quite enough, is leveraging the actual schedule itself to maximize overall starts. So you're going to be, if you're managing your team properly, you're going to be handling any potential bench issues and schedule related things on a week to week basis. That means dropping your marginal players that you're going to be benching anyway, and picking up players that have a lot of starts on off nights to avoid needing to bench them. The problem, I think, with this season is that I don't think we're going to see a lot of off nights. They're trying to play 56 games in a pretty short period of time.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a lot of on nights pretty much all the time. And it's going to be, so I think like that aspect, that drafted Anaheim Duck mentality, since the Ducks always seem to have the best offseason schedule, probably doesn't really matter this season, which is unfortunate because I feel like that was where I had an edge, or where we had an edge in most leagues, is being able to make sure that we have a good team composition for the schedule. So it's I feel like we're not really going to be able to recommend the same strategy unless the schedule looked crazy, which is plausible. I mean, they may have that sort of 3-game series thing and then kind of do a couple nights off and then 3 more on or whatever. But we're not really going to know a whole lot until the schedule, and I feel like we're not going to be able to maximize against said schedule quite as much. So it's going to be more about matchups and less about schedule, would be my guess.
The other interesting thing to think about with this, I think, is going to be the concept of peripherals. I need to go back and look because I don't remember, for example, if there's more or less peripherals in a back-to-back game. But that's another thing I thought about a little bit, is because there's going to be more rivalries. So, for example, the Rangers are only going to play the Isles, the Devils, Pittsburgh, like division rivals, essentially, the entire season. There's a good chance that there's going to be a lot of PIMs, a lot of heated rivalries, essentially. I think the Rangers and the Isles, for example, could really get into it. So I almost, maybe a hot take, but I think in like PIMs leagues and hits leagues and that stuff, I actually kind of lean like, usually I go early on, I want balanced players. I want guys that are going to be very even out, are going to get me peripherals and are going to get me points. But I have a theory that this year points are going to be really hard to come by, I think, in the deeper players, right? I think it's going to be a little harder. Whereas I think peripherals are going to be really easy to come by, especially, say, PIMs or hits or whatever, just because I think there might be more. And this is all speculative. Again, this is with no data in front of me because this is our first episode. And the whole point of this is just like you guys, we're speculating along with you and thinking what might be out there. Using stuff that we've thought about before, but I have this inkling that I might go a little more point heavy at the top this year than I might have in the past, and maybe that's flawed thinking. Maybe I should be doing exactly the same as before. But
were you drafting Evander Kane?
I mean, I would still draft Evander Kane up.
Is he still a second round pick?
I love the man. Yeah, I think so, just because he himself is hard to replace. I'm thinking more of like for example, I used to draft Borietzky.
Before we get flamed by any new any new listeners, we're talking about full banger categories leagues that have Pim as a cat.
Pim's hits.
Even then, I'm sure people are like, that doesn't make any sense. Evander Kane is like whatever. He gets like 60 points a season, maybe 55. It's like, well,
fun fact: Evander Kane in our Pim league last year was 5th overall, so or something around there. So I think categories league. So that's another thing I think for new listeners too. One, for new listeners, we do focus on a lot of different types of leagues. So we'll like mention bangers. We tend to focus on bangers leagues because it just encompasses everything. Like if a guy works in a bangers league
meaning it has hits and shots, and
shots, pims, that kind of thing. And a lot of times that'll translate pretty well. We'll also talk about points. So if we're talking about a guy who's strictly a points guy, Johnny Gaudreau, we'll mention normally like he's really good in a points league. Also, Brandon mentioned an episode that we did on stacks. On YouTube, I mean, you can find it on our podcast as well, but on YouTube, it's really good because Brandon has guides on the side in the video that help you walk through it. And his episodes are called Fantasy Hockey 101. So if you want to go on YouTube and search up Fantasy Hockey 101, he walks you through a lot of really good stuff. Also, because we're talking about all his strategy, we'll do an actual episode that's all about drafting strategy for this specific year. We did one every year we do like a drafting strategy episode, which will cover points leagues, categories leagues, deeper leagues, shallower leagues, that kind of thing. So we'll go through all of that, where we take goalies, what we're looking at, things like that. So don't worry, we will cover that. Now, speaking of goalies, that's another area that's going to be really interesting this year because there might be more back-to-backs and a condensed schedule, right? Where even if it's not back-to-backs, there's a lot more games in a shorter amount of time. So there's a very good chance that we're going to see backups get a lot more starts than usual, I think.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I've been looking around at mock drafts I see posted on Twitter and just in other fantasy circles. And my overwhelming response so far has been, wow, they are taking goalies early. Like we talked pretty much just previously to getting on to record this about what goalie do you draft in the early rounds. And the only one both of us agreed on that we'd take early and feel good about it is Vasilevsky.
That's it.
I think that when I say early, I mean like top 3 rounds or so. But after that, like if you want a top goalie, you get into the midway through round 3 and there's only Vasilevsky been taken, then I think you start looking at the Hellebucks and other like high volume players. No, I don't even know that I do Leonard because he has Marc-Andre Fleury behind him.
So that's the
unless
thing.
They trade him.
That's an interesting thing though. Is what we've seen I think change a lot in this past 2 years, especially, is we've seen teams be very willing to ride the hot hand, to ride a goalie who's doing well. And if you think about it, like let's say last year, right? There were cases where Bob. I mean, is it an inaugural episode without me talking about Bob? No. So here I am. I'm still sad about it, by the way. If you were wondering, I'm heartbroken. I have a Bob painting somewhere. If not, I actually don't. But I should get one commissioned for the background, actually. That'd be a really, really cool thing to have as the background art. Anyways, so Bob last year, when he was kind of losing the net because he was just so bad, they let Drieger take the net for a while. So what does that mean for this year? Say that Drieger takes over the net for 6 games. That's a pretty big chunk out of your 55 games or whatever, right? Like, I think I expected a high volume guy to start like 40, 44 games this year. Probably something like that is healthy. I could see Hellebuck starting 50 games this year, honestly. Depending on the schedule. If the schedule's not super back-to-back heavy.
I don't think anybody's starting 50 games.
I mean, maybe.
If there's 56 games, there's no way.
If anyone's doing it, it's Hellebuck. He's the only guy who starts.
But even that would pace even higher than he usually does. Like
I know
45 is a crazy amount of games to start.
I know, but I
think the average starting goalie gets
Hellebuck started like
30 to 35 this season. That's what I'm thinking.
Hellebuck started like 60
of 82,
yeah,
right?
But that's what I'm saying.
You're saying
like
50
40.
of 56. That's
40 or 50
him
something.
essentially starting 70.
I can do it.
40.
Less games overall.
The highest
though.
I see any.
Less
I would
minutes
bet
overall.
the highest any goalie starts this season is probably like 44 games or something.
Okay, I can agree with that. I mean, I think
44. Even that would be too high for most.
I said he could go to 50 in a crazy perfect world. There's no way because there'll be more back-to-backs than 5. Anyways,
yeah, I think the average is going to be somewhere between 30 and 35.
Fair,
which means
I'll take that.
your backup's going to get 25-ish starts. That's pretty good. Like that's easy waiver.
I also think that because you're playing the same team, I could see the hot hand effect coming into play a lot more, even, right? Like, say, we've always known, for example, Henrik was really good against the Capitals and the Hurricanes for whatever reason. Maybe they give all the Hurricane games to Lundqvist. Or say that there's going to be Tampa playing a really crappy team like Detroit or Ottawa. If that's happening, maybe they rest Vasilevsky for those games. You know, like there's maybe,
I don't even know who he's backing up at this point.
Well, but my point is just like think about any other team, right? Vasilevsky doesn't have a good backup, and he's Vasilevsky. But think about other guys like Rask, for example, who has Halak. Like, Halak can easily take over.
I'm staying away from those guys.
Khudobin can take over the net.
Yeah, I mean that's part of why I'm staying away from Leonard. I don't want Leonard.
Yeah.
I want the other guys that I would be thinking about would be like Hellebuck, of course. He's got Laurent Brossoit behind him, which is fine, but he's not going to be volume starting. I feel like a lot of people are going to be into the Arizona goalies, but I think we could see split starts there if Ronta's healthy for as long as he's healthy. I think that some of the newer goalies are being faded from what I've seen so far. Guys like Samsonov, right, in Washington.
Very hard.
And then we've got Sorokin on the Islanders. Like you'd probably be able to get him as a waiver pickup, I would think. I don't know how active people are on him, but he
split with Varlamov. Honestly, I think
they
split.
He's like Samsonov and Shesterkin were all basically grouped in this like elite Russian goalie coming to the NHL, and we've already seen Samsonov and Shesterkin be pretty good. Shesterkin especially so. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody if Sorokin comes out and plays well against one of the best defensive systems in the league, maybe the best.
Behind, not against.
Behind, yes. Not against, right. So I think there's going to be... I personally am probably not taking a goalie in the first 8 rounds, even. I think that, like... Yeah, I think... And we actually have changed our main league. So typically we did win, save percentage, goal against average. We saw a lot of goalie benching and punting no matter what we did there. So we've changed it to wins, saves, save percentage. And I think in sharp leagues, you will see that if you don't make this change. People will just find a good goalie and get the minimum starts out of them and then bench. Which is fine, but that leads to running one goalie, and we kind of didn't want that.
I do like.
So with that in mind, I may run 3 goalies this season, but
I was thinking the same
using
thing.
my waiver for that third goalie, right? Send him out when I don't need him, bring him back when I do, that type of thing. Because I think there's going to be so much waiver opportunity for backup goalies that are going to get good starts.
I've also thought a lot about tandems. So I've thought a lot about 3 goalies where you have one, say, top goalie like Hellebuck or Vasilevsky or something. Just I'm throwing things out there, what I've thought I might do with goalies. Maybe having like one top one and then a tandem that's going to be more likely than not a 1A, 1B, and kind of targeting that. Maybe Samsonov and Hank. Or getting like or even trying to get like a Sorokin Varlamov or some other goalie, or even Matt Murray.
That was the exact tandem I targeted all last season. Was
Greiss and
Varlamov and Greiss.
Yeah,
and I got that tandem in a handful of leagues.
Yeah,
and
it
was great.
Yeah, so I think that there's a very strong case for being able to find a very good tandem late for one of the lower teams, then kind of being carried. And I should also mention our next
You have to pay
episode.
attention to your league, though.
Yes.
If you have, like, our league wins, save percentage, in a typical season, again, this one is hard to predict, but in a typical season, I wouldn't do a tandem in that league just because you're forced into having a third goalie minimum to be able to keep up with the cumulative stats in the saves. This season, like I said, I expect starting goalies to not get a whole lot more starts than systems that have a 1A, 1B. I don't think there's going to be a huge division there just because of the volume of games and the labor intensiveness of being a goalie in a condensed season like this.
I should also mention that the next episode we do here is going to be a league settings episode. So we'll walk you through how we set up our leagues, what we suggest. I think I might have said that already, but I want to mention that again. And then we'll also be doing a fantasy mailbag episode. So be sure to check out our Twitter. We'll post the Google form there where you can ask us questions, and we'll get to as many as we can on an episode and try to answer some questions. We might do a live stream at some point just to answer questions live. We do those on YouTube every once in a while. I don't have much else here about the divisions, at least at a high level. I think there's going to be an interesting case for top teams where they're going to be able to feed or feast on other
Yeah.
teams. I think it's going to become very clear, very quick who's good and who's bad. I think that happened during the restart of the playoffs. We noticed the Rangers were absolute trash. I think we'll notice really quickly this season who's got it and who doesn't. I mean, you don't have a lot of leeway to mess up. Like I think that's going to be an interesting thing. You do not have a lot of leeway. And on top of that, I think from a coaching perspective, you don't have a lot of leeway to like change things up. Like either your system works or it doesn't. Right. So I think that we're going to see coaches go in with a mentality and stick to
I wonder if we're going to see more or less coaches fired this season than
less.
typical.
I think less, just because I don't think front offices are going to see it as indicative of their performance.
Yeah.
Although
probably true, but who knows?
Although we'll see. I think there's going to be cases like, for example, the Rangers, who have a lot of young guys, and if the young guys aren't handled well or they're not doing well, I think they're just like, okay, screw this. And especially with the Rangers, they also had a terrible quote unquote postseason, right? Like they looked awful on both ends of the ice. And if that continues, then I think we see a firing. But for the most part, I'd say it's not going to be because of performance. Like I don't think it's going to be, oh, you didn't make the playoffs or something, unless it's unless it's even John Cooper. I could see the Lightning be missing the playoffs and John Cooper still keeping his job. Maybe.
I cannot see Tampa missing the playoffs.
I can't see them missing the playoffs.
Anything like that division.
Same.
But another thing to think about with these divisions is, again, just to reinforce the fact that it seems likely that teams are only going to be playing other teams in their division until the playoffs, which effectively means for the entire fantasy season. Just because the team is bad, if they're in a division that is conducive to goals, it's net positive for their players anyway. So an example would be Florida, right? We're talking about a division that, yes, they're kind of part of the reason why it's a good division to be in, because they're not exactly super good defensively. And Bob has kind of been a little shaky as far as finding his form, as we all know at this point. But the other opponents they have in that division don't look super strong either. So it's all gonna boil down to what the divisions look like to see where you can get some extra value. But you won't be surprised to see Huberdeau have another good season this season.
Same.
Taking good players on good teams. Like I mentioned Point as the example earlier. Like you're not going to get a whole lot of extra value out of that because he's a known entity in a way. But if we see, for example, Detroit winding up in a very beneficial division, suddenly guys like Dylan Larkin could really jump up the ranks. He's kind of a darling for us a bit. But Anthony Mantha, I think guys on bad teams that look like they can have a strong season might find their way into a very strong season depending on their division this season.
I also want to say I think people are going to focus on the idea of good division, bad division too much. Like, for example, I think players are going to be avoided in the Canadian division. Like, I think Winnipeg is going to be slept on a lot because everyone's going to view them as in this really hard Canadian division. How can they compete? Like the Wheelers, the Line-A's, and I know that Scheifele, and I know they had a somewhat difficult season, so that's one reason. But I wouldn't write them off because they're in this difficult Canadian division. Yeah, but that's the thing is I think that people are going to focus on this concept of a good or hard or easy division too much, whereas it's just going to be like, what do they do? And certain guys I think won't necessarily be affected. I mean, they have hard games all season long. It's not like this is new to them. I actually think
the Canadian division is going to be one of the easier divisions to score goals.
I agree with that.
I think it's everybody in that division is going to be in good shape.
I think there's going to be a lot of goal scoring. I think there's going to be a lot of goals.
I think, the funny thing is, I think Ottawa is a team to pay attention to.
Yeah, agree.
In the Canadian division. Like, we could see, sneaky. I mean, Brady, okay. Like, we can ignore a few of these players that we know about. Chabot, I think, actually might jump up the ranks a little bit.
Yeah.
But some of the newer players that are going to be coming in over there, they've got this glut of young players coming in.
No Glove Hand Murray is new. You've got Dadonov. We got Daddy.
Dadonov, yeah.
Some new guys.
Connor Brown, I think, could have a good season. I think we could see a good season out of Drake Batherson. I think we could see a good season out of potentially Logan Brown if he can find his way to the top center position. There's a lot of interesting things going on in Ottawa, and I'm not saying draft Ottawa players. In fact, I'm saying quite the opposite. I'm just saying pay attention.
Yeah.
Because I think you might find sneaky value out of those guys because they're playing weak defensive teams.
This is also a thing we say every single year. Right, with like the Larkins and whatnot. People focus too much on good teams because if you're new to the show, one thing I'll say a lot, some people like it, some people hate it, is that people like to touch nice things. I don't
like this.
Brandon hates when I say that. He hates it. He thinks it's weird. I don't think it's that weird.
It is absolutely weird.
It's not weird. People like to touch nice things. Is that not true? People like to touch nice things. It's the truth.
If you
walk by a store and you see like a nice,
I don't want to hear the rest of this metaphor.
I was gonna go somewhere, but I'm not gonna go with it. Fine, I'll leave it. But anyways, the point is, people like nice teams way too much. They always want a piece of it. Like they'd rather have the third liner on the Tampa Bay Lightning because Tampa Bay Lightning is first in the division than the top liner on Detroit. Even though the one that contributes the most, the one that plays the most minutes, the one that has the most opportunities is the first liner on Detroit. But they don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because they're on Detroit and they're last place.
Or because they have plus minus. Boo.
Or plus minus, which we hate plus minus. Hello. But anyways, okay. I think we should wrap this up. This is enough rambling from us. We will be back on Monday with the league settings episode. So definitely tune in for that one. And if you have any questions about what settings you think and maybe exact specific things you want to hear about, be sure to tweet at us at Fantasy Hockey PD. We are the police department for the fantasy hockey community. We keep an eye out for you.
We almost turned it into a Bobrovsky joke.
We did,
actually,
and then Bobrovsky
the old,
fell off a cliff, and now we pretend
the old
not to be associated
TSN
with
gags with him.
You know,
but
well, that doesn't happen.
Too late now.
Yeah. Well, anyways, thank you for listening. We will catch you next time. This is the Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I'm Gamby. That's Brandon.
I'm Brandon. Yep.
We will catch you next time.
That's who I am. Yep. Thanks for listening.